Athanatophobology is real. It has been validated. I know this because I am not afraid to die. Thanatophobia, the fear of death, is panmemic. Panmemic, pertaining to all the minds. It's panmemic. It's in so many people are afraid to die. And I assert that it is unreasonable. Athanatophobology, it's something that I have been studying for years. I recently coined the term. There already, of course, is the term thanatophobia, the fear of death. Athanatophobia is not fearing death. And the ology you add as a study of, right? Athanatophobology. And I'm claiming it as a very specific niche in thanatology, the study of death and dying, as a unique line of inquiry, as one of my specialties. It's something that I have been pursuing for quite some time, as I said before. And I really thought that I would specifically be studying thanatology, just death and dying. But it's come to be more important to study and learn and apply how not to fear dying and why you should not fear dying. And with that, some very clear, actionable steps have come out of that. And in this vein, I actually wrote my PhD thesis at the University of Metaphysical Sciences, basically on the death of the entire universe. It's called Eternal Echoes, Metaphysical Inquiry into the Fate of the Universe. And in the personal relevance section, of course, I talk about a personal loss and how that's been part of that whole journey. I mean, the thesis covers a lot. Before the loss, after the loss, it is really, it encapsulates a lot. And then I went on to continue to look at the eternal, and then realized that it was necessary to establish an axiom, in which I published the axiom of necessity, or actually I wrote the axiom of necessity, and then I wrote and published the eternality axiom. The axiom of necessity was published later. It was just actually something I did, almost like writing a note to myself about the necessity of an axiom, which then became axiom of necessity, which led to the eternality axiom, which was really directly influenced by eternal echoes and my long dwelling on really just embracing thanatology, the study of death and dying. But it evolved, and I'm glad that it did, because it merged with a practice that I have been engaged in for many moons, and it has come to be known as Athanatophobology, the study of not fearing death. And so I would say that it's the study of why and how to not fear death, or how and why, why and how to not fear death. How and why and how. And so these actionable parts of that really have to do with some very fascinating anecdotes that I have, but I have not nailed down exactly where they came from or who said it. So if people know, you can share that with me. But some very interesting thing is, I've been practicing martial arts for quite some time, almost 4 decades, almost 40 years. And I consume a lot of martial arts related media, and probably somewhere on one of the social media sites, I'm thinking it must have been Facebook, there was a gentleman who seems to do commentary about Judo, and he relayed a story about how some young children were given the rules of Judo, and that they had to do takedowns and take down the person, throw them onto their back, and or hold them down for 3 seconds, a pin, in order to win. However, these students were not given or taught the techniques to do so. But what happened, just by knowing the end result, they eventually started developing all manner of various different recognizable Judo techniques in order to get to that result. And all different levels, from beginner to advanced skills, whatever it was, to get the opponent to throw them onto their back and or pin them without being taught any of it, just by being given the end goal. For me, I experienced something similar with capoeira. Where capoeira is not usually taught in a way where you go enter tournaments. So, for example, with wrestling and boxing and Muay Thai, for example, those 3 are combat sports in which you don't get belts, but you're simply taught. You're trained to fight, to get in the ring, to start sparring, and to eventually compete. That's why you train those sports, usually. I mean, there are some Muay Thai gyms I know of now. I don't really look into them, but I'm pretty sure that there are some that don't actually train people to compete. They may. I mean, I'm not certain of it. But what I do know in general, that Muay Thai, boxing, and wrestling are trained without belts, and they're trained to compete. And capoeira is trained more as a folk art. They focus on the dance, the game, but not really the martial part of it. Although the game can get kind of aggressive, it can be very competitive, but it's not trained for how people would think of now, which is very popular, is MMA or kumite or any of those, full contact sports where you're knocking people out. Although I'm sure that I haven't been to Brazil yet. I'm sure that there are very interesting renditions of capoeira in Brazil and competitions that go on there that are quite different. My point here is that I approached capoeira at first with the intention of it being a fighting style that I could defend myself with and maybe eventually do competitions. But I was never taught that. It was just always the game of capoeira, go to open rodas, play the game, only go to different rodas, or roda means circle, to circles where there's open games with your mestres or your group, so that there's no issues, and because people get into fights, all on and on and on. But there was never any actual fight, any martial arts being taught in the sense of learning how to fight. There were no sparring, there was nothing like that. It was all play, which is fine. But I have I have and had the intention to use it to fight, and so I eventually did start. Well, I didn't eventually. I just started doing that. At first, it was with a friend. We would go to his house in his backyard, my backyard, at the beach, in a schoolyard, like wherever, and we would just use capoeira and other techniques that we knew. He was obsessed with Bruce Lee's one-inch punch. We both were big fans of Bruce Lee. I had Bruce Lee's fighting method and the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, and so we'd combine. It was like one of the first things that we were doing. We were combining Jeet Kune Do philosophy and some techniques from the books and things that we saw Bruce Lee doing with capoeira. And he originally called it mezcla, which is just a Spanish word that means mix. And he was actually the one who introduced me to capoeira, Jose. So that's what we were doing. And, eventually I was on the wrestling team in high school, and then I went on to live with a boxer, and then I met some Muay Thai people, and on and on and on. I just kept on adding skills. And even before that, I was sparring with Shotokan and karate guys and other people and doing all these other things at parks. So I was just building up a repertoire, but also figuring out, since I had started capoeira when I was 15 and just going through all of these things, I was figuring out what worked and what didn't. And I was slowly letting go of a lot of what didn't work in the various different kind of fights that I was getting into. And eventually I somewhat excommunicated and ostracized myself due to my behavior from most capoeira groups. I just stopped training with any particular academy of capoeira, and I would only show up just to play. And that was fine with me. I just wanted to play and show off and do flips and flashy stuff. And so that's what I did. And then I, did some amateur tough man MMA. I had 52 fights there, and I went on to do some other stuff in kickboxing. But it was all testing how could capoeira work. And so my point, just like with the kids in judo, my end goal was to learn how to fight, and I based it on capoeira. And so I learned how to fight using capoeira. And so it's roughly based on the Jenga being modified as a way to learn how to be ambidextrous and as equally balanced on both sides with my attacks and escapes, by just practicing symmetry, basically, and learning how to switch, and then full body awareness. And so there was just a lot that went into that. And what I'm also saying here is that my end goal at one point in time became, because of just various insecurities and things I didn't like about fear, that I decided that the ultimate goal was to not fear death. That what other fear is there that's greater than that? I mean, there's pain, torture, all kinds of other assaults and things like that you can think of that people would say is worse than death. But then maybe the real fear underlying all that is pain. And although I don't actively want to be injured in a way that's going to incapacitate me, I do actively seek out pain. I do these concrete knuckle slam push-ups that I do. They're similar to how people do those clapping push-ups, where they push away from the ground and clap, and then their hands slam back into the ground. Well, I push away from the ground so far that that my upper body is jumping away from the floor, and then I'm slamming back into the ground with my knuckles, the punching knuckles. So I'm doing pushes on my knuckles, pushing away from the ground and slamming back down into the, and then I do these jump switch lunges, and doing 40 of them, your legs start to burn. And every opportunity that I get, I run upstairs, like 10, 12 flights of stairs, and it's burning. Or I really push myself very hard when I'm training, to the point where I'm starting to get really severely burned out and out of breath in my body. Just says, okay, dude, take a break. And and I do, my workouts are 5-minute rounds, 5 rounds that are 5 minutes long each. and just pushing myself as much as possible. And even like earlier today, well, yesterday now, because it's just 5 minutes past midnight, I was out and it was 90-degree plus heat, training, dirt and grass, outdoors, and then took a brief break only to go drink some water, take a shower, and then go train with a couple guys for another hour and a half, 2.5 hours of training. And there's a certain part of it that hurt, but there's also a lot of it that was very pleasurable. I don't know what portion of it. I'm not even sure if they're really that distinguishable for me anymore. And so the solution for fearing death is basically a rerouting, a hacking of a few aspects of the fear response. So there's a Secret Service agent named Tim McCarthy who jumped in front of a bullet to shield President Ronald Reagan, and he took a bullet in his gut for it. As far as I know, I think Ronald Reagan did catch a bullet, but it wasn't fatal. It was like in his shoulder or something like that. I don't remember what it was. But for all I know, that Tim McCarthy could have very well been the reason why Reagan wasn't assassinated that day in March 31st or something like that of 1981. Now, the interesting thing about that is through rigorous and intense training, he was able to override his the normal response that fear would lead someone to do, which is to duck and cover and protect themselves, right? To cower, fear, maybe cry, scream. That's it, cream. Cry, scream, whimper, right? Panic, become hysterical, and instead reroute that energy into becoming a human shield against bullets. It's not normal behavior, but you can normalize that behavior. You can make it normal for you, is the point. And so something very clear here is that what I said very carefully was that he rerouted all of that energy that normally would lead him to do all of those other less dutiful things, and trained so much that instead he did the dutiful thing of doing his job to protect the president. But this says nothing of where his mind state was, because his mind state could still be in all the panic, hysterical, and all these other things, life flashing before your eyes, but he trained his body to respond to a different way to that. And that's fine, that's great, it's effective, right? Tactically, it works. But what I'm saying is that you can also change what you feel internally when a fearful or a potential fear-inducing stimulus like being shot at comes at you. So that instead of you panicking, being hysterical, feeling that fear, life flashing before your eyes, and taking the action, instead, you can also practice a new feeling. My feeling of choice happens to be as pure a rage as I could possibly find, but a buffered rage. A buffered rage, but this rage is programmed with all of the different ways that I know how to attack. Empty-handed, with weapons, so on and so forth. But it's buffered because you have to assess a situation before you attack. Just because a stimulus might be potentially fear-inducing and cause certain biological processes and your sympathetic nervous system to kick into gear, right? That's the fight, flight, and freeze, right? Instead of it just choosing one of those willy-nilly, unintentionally, you can actually program where the feeling goes. So I choose to Hulk out. Just like when David Bruce Banner, I call him David Bruce Banner because he had a different name. I think the TV show is called David Banner, but in the comic books it's Bruce Banner. I think for whatever reason they couldn't say Bruce Banner. But in one of my songs called Holding It Down, the lyrics say, "Do you really want to fight me? Do you really want to step to my face and excite me? No, you don't want to make me angry, like David Bruce Banner Hulk green with envy. I just really want to cry. I can't find a way out from all this damn human disease. Everyone's about violence, not peaceful silence. And you're all looking at me." Anyway, The whole point was that, like David Bruce Banner, Hope Green with Envy. I actually wrote that in the song. But so, just like when Bruce Banner or David Bruce Banner or David Banner is provoked or feels pain, right? Some kind of high stressor, he hulks out, turns into a rage monster. And there's still a part of him that is doing this for the good of all. And then eventually it becomes Smart Hulk, and he can think more for himself and is generally on a path of being a hero. Now, while I'm not on a path on being a hero, I do know how to Hulk out in a controlled way, because I've practiced over and over again that over years, decades actually, that whenever any stimulus comes in that I've observed either in myself in the past as a child or see other people responding to in a fearful way, I simply change to a pre-programmed script of how I want to respond. And it is a sinister preparedness. It is just all kill mode. But a buffered kill mode, because sometimes things can happen and you don't need to go into kill mode. You don't just automatically attack. Somebody could bump into you by accident. You don't just automatically attack them. But this is also very close to the response that a lot of people have, especially, men. Somebody bumps into you, what's your problem, man? And they just want to start getting all mad about it and just wanting to fight. You bumped into me. Why are you looking at me is my favorite one. What you looking at? And just people just want to puff up, especially people who can't fight, people who don't train at all. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I would recommend that people start training and then also take upon this very high level of training of Athanatophobology, the study of not fearing death. Because what's interesting about that, with all of the things that come with this practice, is you become less prone to any kind of violence at all when you don't fear dying. And especially because part of this state of being that I've come to involves the realization of the truth that there's always somebody bigger and badder. And no matter what, if you just go around being one who constantly gets into, especially unnecessary engagements, you're going to meet that person. But there's also another way to meet that situation that I somewhat inadvertently found out a long time ago, and that was by being on the wrestling team in high school, living with and competing and sparring with people and doing all of these things in street fights. So by constantly getting into confrontations of various different kinds in the ring or on the street, you learn very quickly that, in various different ways you can be beaten, especially by wrestling coaches and your boxing teacher, just people, especially when you confine yourself to a certain skill. This didn't happen in street fights, but when you're confined to a particular set of skills, when you can only wrestle and you can't strike, when you can only box and you can't wrestle, right? When in capoeira, when you are mostly throwing kicks, there's no punches, and you can only kick and move around the way you can and sweep for takedowns, right? And when you're confined to a certain set of rules, you get beat all the time, and it sucks if you let it. But it can also be very liberating, because you realize, okay, these are microcosms for the world at large, especially at combat at large, that you can be beaten by people. But that means your body can be broken, you can be physically beaten, you can be pinned, you can be knocked out, you can be swept off your feet and dropped on your ass, right? But with knowing that, you can get to a place where you declare eternal sovereignty and that you will fear nothing because it's not necessary. It doesn't help anything. And I'm not talking about the response that your body has. Those things can still remain. You can still have the fight response. In combat, retreating is a tactic. It's something that you do intentionally to live to fight another day, or to duck and cover, right? To reload if you're in a firefight. That's not cowardice. That's self-preservation. That's strategy and tactics. To win. So you can run away from a hail of gunfire. It doesn't mean that you're a coward. It means that you're taking cover somewhere, moving out of the line of fire, so that you can fire back, or that you can find a way, to throw a grenade or drop a building on somebody, or some other way to win the fight. And so, not being afraid to die is the ultimate form. If anybody really thinks that they want to be a badass, which a lot of men especially do, right? The testosterone, and a lot of guys who've never been into fights and who don't spar and haven't been to the type of things that I have, they have this very inflated idea of their fighting ability, and you see it all the time. And a lot of times it's because people get loud, and it's what's called posturing. And sometimes a lot of people back down either because they think it's ridiculous, or they get scared because this person is just all pumped. I ain't the one, and what all this other nonsense that people just start spouting out of their mouths. I've actually had 3 people very clear situations of people running away from me by me not doing anything, by me simply standing still, folding my arms, breathing slowly, and just looking at them. Literally ran away from me after they were just talking, and by me just standing there still and calm and just breathing slowly, looking in their direction, they ran away. I've had this happen at least 3 different times. And so, but this is also, maybe I'm just a very cold and calculating person, and I know that when I was standing there, I was just thinking of all the various different forms of attack and counterattack. Everything for me is attack. I'm just attack. That's my point. I train my mind for that to be the response, and for that to be the internal response. Not just that I physically attack, but that my mind is on nothing else. Like, think about what I'm saying here. Is normally when a person feels fear, you can, like Tim McCarthy, and I don't know where his mindset was, but you can train your body to respond to it by behaving in a certain way. But those same thoughts may still be there. Like, it's the energy that's being used to fuel the body, and that kind of nervous, anxious, energy that happens if someone gets scared, but you can turn it to act another way. What I'm saying is that you can fill that whole space with something completely different, something equally as effective, something equally as adrenaline surging, but it's an excitement, it's a rage, it's a fury. It doesn't have to be fear. There are many other things that can elicit the same kind of responses in your body in its place. It's like swapping out one kind of battery for another, or one brand of batteries for another, right? It's not that they're both 12-volt batteries, just one is a different brand of energy. And and this is a little philosophical, metaphysical here, but that's actually what I've done. I've simply just swapped out all of the imagery of fear and life flashing before the eyes, which is really just people's remorses and regrets and things they feel like they're going to leave behind, and things they think they're going to miss, like just all kind of stuff that goes through a person's mind when they're faced with a potential mortality, a mortal situation. But I know that you can just replace it. And then at the height of this, what goes even above that is actually a very high metaphysical stance, in which, and I mentioned this term earlier, but a declaration of eternal sovereignty, which actually just cuts through a lot of the stuff. Because, a lot of fear is fear of pain. And because people fear that they're gonna die painfully, or experience pain when they die. And just all kinds of other things, right? But when you remove this idea of any kind of eternal punishment that can happen to you from the way that you behave, and when you declare that you will bow to nothing, bow to no one, and never submit, regardless of what the circumstances are on earth or any potential afterlife. And you commit to that. You make that decision to do that no matter what. Like, you make a firm decision. Because another problem with the fear of dying and all this other stuff like that, what may happen after you die, is the fear of the unknown, which is, the term that's often used, fear of the unknown. Well, instead of it being an unknown, decide that just in case, like how some people decide they're going to believe in God just in case there is a God so they don't go to hell. You do the opposite. Just in case there is anything afterwards, a God or whatever, that's going to punish me for whatever, you just say, I don't care. I'm not going to submit to it, regardless of what. And that comes down to me personally because I disagree with the behavior of the most common depictions of this creature. And I'm not even going to get into all of my eternality axiom and the omni-factor paradigm. You can look up other podcasts that I've talked about this. This is a subject that I am going to be talking about a lot. It's a very integral aspect of my philosophy is athanatophobology, and being athanatophobic, meaning being one who doesn't fear death. And it's an extremely important part of my system of healthy living and self-defense. And it goes beyond just the physical movements that you can do. I mean, that's a part of it. You want to train your physical body. You want to train it for endurance, for power, for strength, for flexibility, for so many different things. That's a part of it. Another part of self-defense is self-awareness about what you put into your body. So nutrition and just eating clean. Healthy living is in itself a form of self-defense by defending what you put into your body through awareness, through something as simple as reading labels and going for the cleanest food, meaning things that have the least amount of additives or no additives at all. You can find a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of produce, like organic produce as well, that's just like a plant, for example, and there's nothing added to it. And so you go for the cleanest things that you possibly can. And I'm living proof of this, just the way my body performs. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, but I did. I was at a park for an hour and then another hour and a half training. And my body can do that. And I'm 48 years old. And people are looking at me just like, wow, like doing backflips. I mean, just the amount of comments that I get just being out at the park training. And it's not like I'm not used to it. I mean, I've been doing capoeira for 34 years. And especially like some of the flashier stuff of capoeira, but not the Hollywood version. There's a lot of stuff in capoeira that I don't do because I've whittled away a lot of stuff that doesn't work for me in combat. But there's things that I do that are flashy, like, back handsprings, back tucks, a wheel screw, which is a 540-degree barrel roll, maybe even what they call it, I don't remember what it is now, but anyway, there's I have a bunch of different moves that I do, but the point is just because of my overall healthy living, my protocol, how I operate. And so besides all of that stuff, the system very highly urges and suggests that you study why and how to not fear death, why you should not fear death, and how you can be fearless in the face of death and pain. For being afraid of these things is not helpful ultimately, and you become more efficient and think more clearly, and overall in general live a much more healthy life by discarding those types of burdensome experiences. I am Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.